Welcome to the Antisocial Podcast. This is episode 177, 177, with Michael Sheldrick of Global Citizen. But before we kick into this week's episode, if we haven't met before, how you doing? Hope you're well. My name is Andy Dowling. I also play bass in the Australian metal band Lord, and you can go and have a sticky beak into the world of being a heavy metal band by going to lord.net.au, or you can go to lord.net.au/united, which is the first single, I was going to say signal, of our brand new album Fallen Idols, which is due out in the coming months, release date TBA. And you can go over there and check out the full track listing for the Australian version of the album. There's the album artwork. There is the YouTube video clip, but you can also check out the video clip on Facebook as well. And the song is also on Spotify, Apple Music, and all those usual streaming services. So go and have a sticky beak. Let me know what you think. And if you know anybody that loves a little bit of heavy metal, you can go and pass that around. That would mean a hell of a lot to me and the guys. In addition to playing in a metal band, I also host the Self-Starter podcast, which is all about small business, self-employment, and freelancing. So depending on what floats your boat, you could be in a job that you hate, you want to get out, or you're about to launch your own business, or you've been in the self-employment world for a few years, whatever it might be, you can go to selfstarter.com.au, or you can search for Self-Starter in your preferred podcast player. I'm in the process of recording season 2 of the podcast, and season 1 ended at the end of 2018, so you can go and check all of those previous episodes out, and season 2 will kick off from June this year, 2019. So go and check all that out. Selfstarter.com.au, lord.net.au. Shout out. Every week I thank somebody who supports me and the podcast, and it can be a range of different ways. It could be buying some merchandise, it could be a guest recommendation, a bit of social media love, it could be a message of encouragement, it could be shouting me a beard via the PayPal button over at andysocial.net. It doesn't matter, it all helps. It keeps this whole thing pumping. So thank you so much to everybody that does support me. But every week I put one person on public record and just give my thanks. It's the least that I could do. So this week's shout out is for Ricky Pfeiffer. Now, some of you people that have been listening to the podcast for quite a while may recall Ricky as a previous guest of the Antisocial podcast on episode 9. That's right, single digits, 9. This is going back a while now. Ricky's a great guy. He is getting a shout out this week just because he went hard on the social media love the other day, and he's just been a great supporter of the podcast, and obviously contributing in the early stages of the podcast when really, I mean, why would you want to speak to me on those earlier episodes? It was just atrocious. But I was really lucky to have some really great guests, especially in those early days, which helped kick off the podcast and really grow the audience. So people like Ricky have been a massive help, and the social media love means a hell of a lot to me. So Ricky, thank you so much. You can go and check out Ricky's photography page and business over at facebook.com/Pfeiffer's Photography, which is PFEIFFERS Photography. Facebook.com/Pfeiffer's Photography. And you can go and check out episode 9 of the Antisocial podcast, where we have a chat to Ricky. And I am due for a trip down to Hobart. I haven't actually gone to Hobart to do any podcasting yet. So when I do that, I might have to get in touch with Ricky and organise a part 2, because I think it'd be really good to have a chat. And I think one of the things we spoke about in that conversation was around equine therapy. Equine therapy. Let's run with that. And he's done a fair bit of that since our chat. So I think even just to talk on that topic would be really cool. So stay tuned on that one. Ricky, when you hear this, shoot me a message and I'm going to flick you out some stuff laying around the house, because we all love getting something in the mail, and I'll make sure you get a laugh out of it. So make sure you hit me up. Thank you very, very much. Also, one of the other things that I've been doing on this podcast is doing some more shout-outs for people that support me via the store links on my website. So that's andysocial.net/buy stuff. And I've got the band online store, Dominus Records online store. I've got the eBay store for myself, and also Discogs, and the Antisocial online store as well. So there's heaps of different things there to go and have a sticky beak and check out what I've got on sale and up for grabs for people that are interested. And in particular, my eBay and Discogs stores are all my personal things. Not literally, I'm not selling everything I own, but I sell a whole bunch of stuff that belongs to me and Jess, and I chuck it up, especially on eBay. There's an incredibly eclectic range of stuff that's available on there. So if you just want to be slightly amused, you can go and check out the eBay store via andysocial.net/buy stuff. And the Discog store is a large portion of my music collection. So records, CDs, cassettes, DVDs, ranging from metal to punk to rock, pop, jazz, everything in between. Go over there. There's about 1,500 titles there to check out. Lots of cheap stuff. Lots of really, really cheap music there. So if you want to just bulk buy, you can certainly do so, and I've got some rare stuff on there as well, so make sure you go and check all that out by going to andysocial.net/buy stuff. And a few quick shout-outs: Melissa from Taylor's Lake in Victoria, Graham from Camp Hill in Queensland, Michael from Inala in Queensland. I also have Scott from Rainbow Flat in New South Wales, and Scott from Kent Town in South Australia. Thank you so much, folks. Really appreciate it, and hopefully you come back and buy some more stuff. Okay, friends, this week's episode is with Michael Sheldrick. Michael's the head of policy for Global Citizen. What is Global Citizen, you ask? Well, I'll tell you, in my words, of course. Global Citizen is an organisation that runs a whole heap of different projects all over the world, and it feeds into this mission statement that they have, which is to build a movement of 100 million action-taking global citizens to help achieve a vision of ending extreme poverty by 2030. So, not aiming too high or anything. But they have been doing amazing things over the past several years and are continuing to go in this amazing direction of really having a dramatic impact on the world. No small feat, but they've been doing great things so far. The organisation started in Australia. They've relocated to New York. They're still based in Australia as well, and they're all over the place. So, but I went to their head office in New York. I got to meet up with Michael, and a special shout out to Leon Todd on episode 161 of the podcast. Go and listen to that, and Leon's band Ragdoll. But Leon went to school with Michael and suggested that I reach out to Michael and have a chat to him when I'm in New York. So several weeks ago when I was in New York with Jess, I stopped by the Global Citizen head office and got to have a chinwag with Michael, and we got to speak about the organisation, feed into some of these topics a little bit, some of the myths that are around things such as poverty, and also some of the work that Michael's been doing just in his own journey along the way. And he's been a part of a lot of different campaigns over the years on things such as universal sanitation, access to education, the eradication of polio, which was a massive one for him. And he's also been involved with a lot of the global citizen festivals where they are coordinating and working with some of the biggest music personalities in the world. Some of the biggest pop stars, Rihanna and Beyonce, and old mate from Coldplay, I can never remember his name, but you guys know who I'm talking about. All those guys, and Michael's really front line when it comes to a lot of that coordination of getting these projects up and running and getting the buy-in from the general population all over the world. So it's an amazing thing that they've got set up, and something to definitely check out. So enough waffling on from me. Jeez, I crap on. Please enjoy this episode with Michael Sheldrick.
Global Citizen, we were founded 10 years ago, all by Australians. There was 4 of us that started it. So we're very much Australian grown. And over the last 10 years, we've kind of found this interesting intersection between what we call pop and policy. Basically, how do we use popular culture to get people interested in the fact that, right now around the world, there's some 700 million people or so living in extreme poverty. And we believe that's an injustice. We believe it's wrong. And we also believe there's something we can do about it with our voices. And so, since then, over the last 10 years, we've done all sorts of things, from the Global Citizen Festival here in Central Park to, working with artists in interesting places. As we were just talking before, we had this morning Golden Globe winning actress Rachel Brosnahan down at the UN with us, pushing UN member states on why they need to provide education to vulnerable refugees fleeing, famine-driven Venezuela. But as you said, it's never a dull moment here at Global Citizen HQ.
It's fascinating because it's obviously a different approach to what many other groups or organizations have tried in the past. And I think that's probably been a pain point, is trying to get different generations of people interested and to want to be able to do more, but also to try and get buy-in from people that do have popular status out there in the community, and trying to get them on board to do it as well. And I would assume that there'd be quite a few people out there in music and in movies and things like that, in pop culture, that are actually searching for things to contribute towards as well. But I mean, maybe it's a really silly question, but how do you find these people? How do you connect with these people so you can find the right people that actually fit into what you guys are all about?
Yeah, so we've worked with everyone. Our creative director and curator is Chris Martin, lead singer of Coldplay. We've worked a lot with Rihanna on education. We were just in South Africa with Beyonce and Jay-Z, and each of them have performed several times, both together and separately at various events. So we've worked with a lot of people. I think everyone's on a journey, right? And I think everyone wants to give back, particularly when they've reached this high place. And I think really what entices people about Global Citizen is how we can work with them to bring their fans into this broader movement, we call it. Because, often there's this perception that one of the only ways you can contribute to something is through money, right? And I think artists often feel a little bit uncomfortable at first at just asking their fans to contribute, because for many of these people, like you look at Rihanna's Navy, they're like her friends, right? And, how would you feel if you just signed up to something and the first thing we said is, right, that party tonight you're going to with all your friends? You've got to stand on stage and ask them all to contribute, right? And it's the same thing. They're like, well, this is my family, this is my fan base, friends. I need to take them along on this journey with me. And I think, what entices them about Global Citizen is, yes, we have the festival, but it's also this 365-day-a-year movement, right? And so, I think it's an opportunity for them to get engaged, learn about the issues, get their fans involved as well. And what we excel at is creating, meaningful campaigns that they can get their fans involved in. So, for instance, with Rihanna, we worked actually with the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, over the last few years to raise something like $2.5 billion US for education, right? And Julia Gillard had she was very smart, former education minister before she became Prime Minister. She had the plan, but it was like, how do we put this on the agenda? And Rihanna agreed to champion that. But it was almost like when she was going in to meet with some of these world leaders, she met with President Macron of France, she was taking this navy with her of, 80 million followers on Twitter who over the previous months, they had been, following her in Malawi, following her, learning about these issues. And so when the president, for instance, didn't keep his word, or we heard he may not keep his word, he had committed to provide 200 million euros. And there was this whole discussion about whether it was in fact real money. We could call on her fan base to say, come on, Mr. President, you promised. And he was getting literally thousands of tweets. So I think that's it. I think it's genuine, meaningful, authentic engagement that doesn't just involve them, but takes their fan base on a journey and ultimately helps us build what we call this global citizen movement.
And I guess the more people that you get on board, it's like anything. It's that sort of networking element that would be a big part of this success that the organization's had so far, where if you get one person, then it's almost like legitimizing everything that you're doing. So then their peer group are able to sort of say, oh, well, if that person's doing it, then they must be a good group to be associated with. And I'll be more open to seeing what those possibilities are. So it's sort of like a chain reaction.
Yeah, I think you're right. And this is actually how we work with Chris Martin. So when I think back to 2015, that was the first year we had worked with Coldplay. They were performing at our Global Citizen Festival here in New York, which we do every September since 2012. So this will be our 8th year. And we have 60,000 people come along to Central Park. And the only way you can get tickets is downloading the app, taking action, earning points, trading in those points. But Coldplay were performing in 2015. And at that same day, it was they were performing right across the road at the United Nations. They were actually agreeing to this plan, this roadmap, and it hasn't received a lot of attention kind of in mainstream circles. So, many of your viewers may not have heard about it, but this plan called the Sustainable Development Goals, not perhaps the best name to catch on to. But the amazing thing about this plan is for the first time ever, all 193 countries of the UN, Australia, United States, all of them agreed to this plan, which put a deadline on ending extreme poverty. It said, for the first time ever, we agree to end extreme poverty and wipe it from the face of the earth by the year 2030. And this was launched, signed, sealed, and delivered the same day. Right across the road at Central Park was doing this festival. And Chris Martin, he heard about this and he heard about these goals. And I think he said, what? I feel like we're standing here on stage calling on these leaders to make these big, robust commitments, but I feel like we should be making a commitment as well. And he was like, I'm not a prime minister, I'm not a president, there's limits to what I can do. But one thing I do know is I know musicians, and I know musicians incredibly well. And I'm going to make a 15-year commitment to these goals, to this deadline of 2030. And you know what my commitment's going to be? Engage in more musicians, be it in India, South Africa, in Germany, wherever, to get them involved. So he basically said that he made this commitment that each year for the next 15 years, from 2015 to 2030, he would go around the world with us and we would take the Global Citizen Festival, take it outside Central Park and basically produce it in another city to remind leaders of the promises they made. And the critical thing is he wasn't saying, he says, I'm not necessarily going to perform at all these, but I'm going to work my networks and circles to engage people to be ambassadors. Because to your point, that's how we're going to create change. That's how we're going to get a ripple effect. So in India in 2016, we actually did it on World Toilet Day. And I remember when we announced that, Chris said, he said, November 19, which also happens to be World Toilet Day, which makes a lot of sense for all of you that associate Coldplay with toilets. But we had Bollywood artists involved. Then last year, just a few months ago, we did this huge event in Johannesburg to honor what would have been the 100th birthday of arguably the greatest global citizen of our time, Nelson Mandela. And, we had amazing artists right across the continent. We had, some of Nigeria's top artists performing who any single one of them would have stacked out the stadium we were playing in, by themselves. And so, like to your point, that's the power of Ripple and, like the power of someone like Chris recruiting others to get them and their fans involved.
Well, I guess, a big thing that I've noticed a lot more these days is that currency of attention, and it doesn't matter what you do. If you've got attention, then it's almost like the superpower, and you can do a lot of good with it. You can do a lot of bad with it as well. But, when it comes to people in the entertainment industry, musicians, actors and whatnot, they have a lot of eyes, a lot of attention on them. And it's like, well, I'm here to entertain people and give people something to enjoy. But what else can I do with it? And there's a lot of debate out there, and I certainly hear it as a musician where people say, that politics and things like that should stay out of the arts because, blah, blah, blah. But part of what makes the arts so great is that a lot of it has been mixed in with the political aspect, because that's where all the emotion comes. It's a human aspect that we all have to live with. So it's amazing to see someone like Chris to be able to sort of identify this and go, I've got this power as far as, and it sounds very wanky to say power, but I've got this ability to be able to get a lot of attention. So how can I use this for the better?
I think you're right. And there is that long tradition. Like music has long been used to transcend, borders, unite people, bring it together. We always admit that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Very briefly in South Africa, he was there as a speaker, but I remember I was running around, but very briefly I turned around and bumped into Bob Geldof, for instance, who I know is actually more famous for what he's done in this regard than
his music,
than his music. And it's funny, like, you look at what he did with Live Aid, even now that inspires. Like, I was in South Korea a few weeks ago, and the new film that just came out, Bohemian Rhapsody, and I think the guy playing Freddie Mercury
just won an Oscar.
Won the Oscar. But this has become a huge cult thing in Korea. You wouldn't believe it, but this movie has become a huge sensational hit, and in particular the seeing of Live Aid, and basically by them seeing that, because I guess maybe in 1985, you know, at the time that had a lot of, I don't know, maybe it's because it had a lot of British, American artists, maybe it was very well known in the West, I don't know, maybe not in Korea, but it was like a lot of people, a generation finding out about this for the first time.
Happened, yeah.
And they were just so excited. Like, I was on this panel and people were asking me, how can we bring this to Korea? How can we bring, you know, pop and policy together? How can we use artists? And, you know, they've got some great K-pop, you know, artists. How can we get them engaged in this? And it really had people thinking. So I think those examples continue to expire. You know, here in New York, you go back to the early 70s, Madison Square Garden, George Harrison, the concert for Bangladesh. You know, there's loads of examples. So, yeah, for us, it's just a privilege to be able in our small way to, I guess, you know, add to that legacy and hopefully do some good along the way.
And I guess with a lot of musicians, and there are particular individuals out there that have been able to sort of pick up something and run with it and create their own thing. But I think for a lot of musicians out there, they probably do have the ability to get a lot of attention, but probably just not know how to execute it in a way that's different to the normal expectation of getting on stage and performing. And so I would assume that that's where you guys come in to be able to help sort of cultivate that and put it out there in a way that makes sense for everybody involved. So you're sort of facilitating and using their skills of performing and being an entertainer and a pop icon and their audience, but being able to put it out there and help them, you know, deliver this message.
Yeah, I think you're right. And for us, you know, when we've had the biggest impact, it's been how we've been able to use all of that noise that's generated, but off the back of that noise, drive all of this citizen-led actions and involvement around clear goals. I mean, in Johannesburg last year, in the lead up to this event in South Africa, I think we had so we announced the event in July, and we said tickets were available, but you had to do something to get something, and all the way in the lead up to December 2nd, right? So like 4 or 5 months. In that time, we had citizens take over 4.5 million actions, which means that on average, every hour, they were 1,200 volunteer actions were being taken. And these were things like, you know, we had people coming down on Saturdays to help clean plastic from the rivers, right, to keep Johannesburg clean. And if you came down, participated in this citywide cleanup, you went in the draw to earn tickets. It was, you know, because HIV/AIDS is still a big issue across South Africa. We had people come into universities and other partners, you know, disseminating information about HIV/AIDS, getting tested, you know, the importance of that, the importance of prevention. A big issue in South Africa is that girls, there's something like 18,000 girls who aren't registered, don't have any form of ID, and as a result can't sit their school exams. So we did this thing in some of the townships, brought some of these girls together, you know, gave them the information, and then they didn't know what the prize was, but we did this quiz, and those that got it right were told that they had just won tickets to the festival to see Beyonce. And I can tell you, seeing teenage girls go crazy about this is, I mean, it's a sight to behold, and it was just captured, you know, for me, it was just the spirit of all of our energy. So yeah, it's what we do with the noise that matters.
It's almost like a foot in the door, you know. Yeah. You find a way just to wedge the foot in just a little bit and gets the attention, and then be able to use that in a way that sort of spurs more action, like literal action from people. So it's a great concept, and it's funny how, I mean, there have been glimpses of it over the years, but I mean, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that what you guys are doing is pretty unique compared to anywhere else in the world, and it's the name, it's global.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably what is slightly unique is because we were just talking about some of the great events of our times, and these are things which are literally like epoch-making events, like when you talk about Live Aid. But I think the difference and kind of what we did to set ourselves a little bit apart is we also decided that this would be a permanent organization. Like we would build a movement around it, because we were very clear that, it's not a concert that changes people. It's not celebrities that change people. It's people that change people.
Yep.
And so for us, in building this, sustainable movement, we've now come up with, this model by which, yes, okay, if you're in New York, once a year you have the chance to earn tickets to this great festival in Central Park. But you know what? Outside of that, we've now got tickets to some of the greatest artists in the world. It started with just a handful giving us 2 tickets. And now, others right across the board. I mean, I was looking on our app yesterday and we had Backstreet Boys giving tickets to their show. So there's something on there for everyone in terms of music interest, which means that you can take action and points. And of course, I would love to do a festival everywhere. Like we get people all the time coming to us asking us, will we do a festival in their home city? But it's only so many artists you can book. It takes a lot of effort to mobilize that, and that's not how we're going to mobilize millions of people and keep them continued engaged. So we're looking at interesting ways. Can we partner with others? Earlier we were talking about in Ireland last year in Dublin, Arctic Monkeys was giving us tickets to their shows, and we had like thousands of people in Ireland taking action, getting involved, using their voice, having a say. And so for us, that's probably where I see slightly unique. And what it does allow us to do is, we have a lot of business leaders, politicians, they make lofty promises, but we then have the ability to hold them accountable. Okay, you said you were going to do this thing on stage, you committed X number of dollars, but what are you actually going to do about it? And we kind of got the global citizen movement, it can be a carrot and a stick. Hey, listen, you can be a hero and follow through, but if you don't follow through, then you're going to hear about it from global citizens. Maybe it's going to be your Twitter.
It's less painful just to go ahead and commit to it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We're holding them to account.
So shifting a little bit, how did you get here?
Yeah. Good question. It was kind of... I think, when we talk about global citizen now, it's kind of easy to think we had this whole strategy and roadmap, but it wasn't really like that at all. So when we launched 10 years ago, our first event was actually at the University of Melbourne in July 2009. And I had the very prestigious job of walking around handing out sausage rolls to all of the guests at the
glamorous
at the opening reception. Yeah, so that was how I got involved. No, look, when we initially started Global Citizen, we actually we set about to produce concerts, and not necessarily also music as the entry point. I don't know if you remember Al Gore's presentation, his movie Inconvenient Truth around climate change. So we thought, how cool would it be if we could do something similar around issues of extreme poverty, international development, and get people engaged, do a presentation, maybe 90 minutes, and at the end of that, give people some thoughts on which way to go. And our thinking was we didn't actually have to give people that concrete actions. If we teamed up with other big NGOs out there, charities, we could just sign people up at these presentations, at workplaces, schools, send them on their way. So we developed this presentation, and through a fluke, Hugh, our CEO and co-founder, managed to, it's a funny story how he managed to meet Hugh Jackman and get Hugh Jackman on board. He was in Sydney, and I think it was Sydney, it might have been Melbourne, but it was essentially I think it was just after Kevin Rudd was elected. He brought all of these, like 1,000 brightest minds across the country together. And of course, Hugh Jackman was one of them. And our Hugh spotted him at this kind of reception, made a beeline for him. And apparently Hugh Jackman thought he was the waiter and asked him he actually turned around and said, "I'll take a martini." And so Hugh went off, got one for himself, came back and said, here's one for you, and I got one for myself. You and I need to talk. And basically, through that conversation, Hugh Jackman's been involved and been a great, awesome champion of our work for the last decade or so. And so he was the first one that really came on board.
What a nice win.
Well, it was great. And I got to tell you, we did this presentation. We messed around for a few years. We hundreds of thousands of people saw that presentation, and he promoted it, and it came out, and it was great. But you know what? We realized at the end of that, hundreds of thousands were great. We took it to from Australia to New Zealand to the UK, but we realized hundreds of thousands. If you're trying to talk about these issues being very serious, and you're trying to talk about mobilizing a movement to change us, and that needing millions of people, hundreds of thousands isn't that many. So we're like, are we just preaching to the converted? That's the question. And the second thing we realized is we were sending all these people to NGOs, and a lot of these people were millennials. And back then, 10 years ago, starting out, trying to make a go at life, you don't necessarily have a lot of disposable cash. And so if you were these NGOs, you were asking them to sponsor children, all very meaningful stuff, but what could you do if you didn't have any money? So we realized two things. We realized 90-minute presentation, is not very scalable. And I trained up a lot of people in Perth and other places to deliver this presentation, but we realized not very scalable. We also realized that, we would need to build this platform ourselves if we wanted people to get involved. We couldn't outsource this, so to speak. And so, it was in 2011, coming back to Hugh Jackman, that we geared up for our very first event, which wasn't actually in Central Park. Many people think it was. It was actually in Perth, Western Australia.
Good old Perth.
And thanks to Hugh Jackman's introduction, John Legend agreed to fly all the way to Perth for the first event. And then in that process, we developed the model of, you sign up, you take action, and maybe you get to earn a ticket along the way.
It's incredible. I mean, it's one of those things where, it's the movie line, the movie plot where it's like that defining moment, the pivot, the change where, it could, like that sliding doors movie, just depending on what decision you make could take you on a completely different path. And just having your Hugh identify an opportunity and sort of run with that and take advantage of that situation obviously has made a massive impact on what has followed after that.
Yeah, we've just been counting the numbers, and this is actually the first time I've I think revealed these publicly. So your
exclusive
listeners will be the first ones to hear this. So since we began 10 years ago, we've tracked that something in the region of $40 billion US has been pledged in support of ending extreme poverty, whether it's providing vaccines to eliminate diseases against polio, whether it's providing water and sanitation, whether it's providing access to education. And we literally were just crunching the numbers late last week, early this week, and we can say of that 40 billion, because some of that's been pledged over multiple years, we can say $28 billion has already been delivered to organizations doing amazing work. Because this is what we always clarify. Like we know how to mobilize people, but we're not the experts in the field. There's some amazing organizations out there. Our job is to get that money and get it into the hands of people who can make a difference on the ground. So $28 billion has been dispersed, delivered, reached organizations doing great work at the grassroots. And as a result of this, 990 million people over the last decade have been impacted in some way. And so we're gearing up for a big 10th year anniversary this year, a 10th celebration. But what that celebration is really in support of, and we've had some amazing artists supporting it along the way, but it's really all of those citizens as well. 10 years of citizen-led impact leading to 990 million people being reached in some meaningful way.
That's incredible. And I mean, just going back to what you said before, where you guys are making that decision going, well, we could be just preaching to the already converted of a few 100,000, and now to be able to sit here years later and you're getting close to that 1 billion mark. I mean, the numbers hard to grasp, and I'm sure you guys are probably pinching yourselves at times going, wow, we've done it. But it's probably almost become a bit of a norm as well, because it's been this gradual progression of just building and building over time and strengthening those networks. We were having that chat before we started recording about just the types of meetings that you guys are having with people in Congress and people, delegates from other countries, and getting their buy-in. So it's not just about sort of impacting your everyday person, but it's putting the hard word on these people that can make really powerful decisions that can impact millions and millions of people. And
I think it's, and not losing sight of what that human impact means. I mean, it's one thing to talk about numbers, right? But you mentioned we were speaking to my colleague Madge, and she just returned with Rachel Brosnahan from Peru. And part of the reason they were at the UN this morning was to meet with members of the UN Security Council. You know, it's always this gridlock at the UN, you know. There's people fleeing from Venezuela. 3 million people have fled. There's millions more people suffering from hunger, famine. You can't get food in the country. Like, all of these issues, and this shouldn't be about politics, right? And there's always this gridlock at the UN. But, you know, part of the reason why they were there meeting with all these ambassadors was to share some of the stories. And, you know, they met, you know, some of these refugees fleeing. Like, this is happening everywhere. And there's things that these people in power can do. And sometimes there's just so much noise going on that they forget that this is people's lives. But on the flip side, while they were in Peru, I didn't get to go, unfortunately. I was in Korea, but they were sharing some of the stories. They met a family who 2 years ago, so there had been this mudslide in Peru. And 2 years ago, we fundraised, we did a call out from governments of France and others to support providing people affected by this mudslide with education through one of our partners. It's called Education Cannot Wait. And, you know, partners stepped up. France committed 2 million, actually came in 2.3 million. Canada came in with 17 million. Like, there was a good response to this appeal. And they met one of the families just 2 weeks ago in Peru with Rachel Brosnahan, who, had it not been for this support, would not have been able to receive education from their family after they were affected through this mudslide. And I just think, like, that's what matters here. That's why we're in this. Each of those 990 million people, they have a face, and it's to change lives and ultimately end extreme poverty. That's why we're here.
And I guess, you know, those people that hold these, you know, really important positions and have a large degree of influence can be quite detached from the everyday life. But I mean, ultimately, they're a human, they're an individual, they've got the same basic needs that everybody needs. And it's trying to, I guess, as you said before, cut through the noise and sort of bring them back to earth and go, we're all the same here, and while we might be living different lives, we ultimately all need the same things, and sometimes it just needs to be hit at the right angle where it cuts through, and people can suddenly have that light bulb moment, go, oh wow, like this is the impact that I potentially can have if I make the right decisions. And I think even sort of in a general public point of view, I mean, I can only speak from my own experiences, you get detached from it all as well, because there's just so much going on. You know, you sign up or you donate to something, and then you get ambushed by that organisation constantly, where it's this passive aggressive guilt that just keeps putting, and then you think that you're a bad person because of it. And then on the flip side, there's so much noise out there that you sort of think, like, then it's just numbers now. It's numbers, they're not people. And it's only when you do hear a story, you know, whether it be now on a Facebook feed, on a video, or a podcast, or whatever it might be, or meeting someone in real life, and you think, wow, like this could be my parents, this could be a brother or sister, it could be a friend, it could be anybody, and it's far more relatable than many of us think. And it's just it's weird how I think just fast-paced society and the way that we all move on an everyday basis, that we get swept up in that monotonous sort of thing where we're just detached from reality, so to speak. So it's important stuff. It's very simple when you want to have those conversations with people and bring it back to a human level, but it can be difficult. It can be a real challenge.
I think you're right, and there's something in that you touched upon, which I firmly believe is people live their lives like in stories, right? And so how can you find the right stories that connect with them? And one thing I always tell our team here, it's easy for even us to get caught up in numbers. Like, okay, because, we're trying to get these governments to shift large numbers of money to make it a priority. And, we have war rooms and, when it gets down to it, we're very focused, laser tight focused sometimes on hitting our goals. But, sometimes when I step back, I say, what's really potentially going to move this situation is telling the right story. Like, what's the story we're going to share here? And that can speak far more meaningfully than any numbers. And so whether it's the festival, whether it's an individual meeting, next 2 weeks time, I've got a famous actress coming into the office, and we're going to try and convince her to become an ambassador for water and sanitation. And when you get to sanitation, it's not the sexiest issue.
I was going to say, it's not a glamorous topic.
No, I remember years ago when we had Jay-Z perform, and I wanted to make the central issue about the fact 1 in 3 people in the world don't have access to a clean toilet. And our festival director said, come on, man, I'm bringing Jay-Z, and you want to make this thing about toilets? I'm like, actually, did you know not having access to toilets is the second biggest killer of children under the age of 5 through diarrhea-related diseases? Like, not sexy, but it's something we should talk about. But anyway, so I've got this meeting in a few weeks' time, and I'm going to try and convince this actress to become an ambassador for this issue and get her fans engaged. And just yesterday, we were going through a presentation with my colleague Talia, who you just met before. And, we had all the statistics, we had all of this. And I said, I don't think this is what's going to get her. We have to share, what we need to share the stories of? Some of the incredible, courageous workers who are actually doing this work on the ground, because they're the true heroes in this story. And I think if she understands what they're doing and understands the courage by which they go about their work, then maybe, just maybe, she'll want to stand in solidarity with them and say, I want to support these people here because they're amazing.
And they can put a face to it. I think that's a big thing. It's that personal connection where you can put an identity to the topic or the bigger issue, and then you go into bat for that person, or that person becomes a symbol of this bigger thing. And when you are looking at numbers, it's that disconnect which is really difficult to sort of overcome. And so the data is really important, and it can be a massive help to sort of give context and give extra ammunition to sort of validate why we're doing this. But ultimately, for a lot of people, we need to sort of be hit in the heart a little bit and go, oh wow, like that's a real person. That's a real person out there doing great work, or that's a real person that's being impacted by it as well. And so it wouldn't be an easy thing to do. And especially when you've got people, and I don't know who this person is that's going to be coming in, but...
Well, put it this way. If we're successful, you'll soon find out.
I'll soon find out. But it would be just as... I would assume there'd be just as much pressure put on that situation as having those types of conversations with people in government as well, because these people are in a position where they're getting ambushed on a day-to-day basis from people wanting them for whatever reason that might be, legitimate reasons, illegitimate reasons. And so for them to be able to stop, have focus and listen and pay attention to what's going on can be a real challenge. So
and you know what, this is why it's so important to engage people in their constituency. Like, you're talking about leaders, right? Politics is all local at the end of the day. That's what I've realized. And they want to hear from the people, frankly, if I'm being candid, that vote for them, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not... and Rihanna is amazing. She's the real deal. Rachel Brosnahan's amazing. She's the real deal. But this is why it's actually who they can recruit in terms of their fans as citizen activists that's actually going to change the game at the end of the day. Because it's not them knocking on the doors of some of these politicians that's going to get them to champion it. Like, I'm sure they would want the photo and they would piece it. But the thing that's actually going to lead to sustained engagement is having those citizens day in, day out saying, hey, we voted you in. This is a priority. Because otherwise, when you're talking about some of the most vulnerable and marginalized, like, in a country like the US, they don't vote. You know, they don't get a vote. So it's sort of like, well, you know, how can you put this on the radar of, say, members of Congress and others? And frankly, it's the people who vote them into power that can do that. And so, yeah, that's how we chink away one piece at a time. But to your point, it's never over. There's always a lot of work to do.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess, you know, several years in now, and thinking about that 2030 goal. I mean, obviously you shared some numbers then, but I mean, how does it sit as far as the trajectory of going in that direction? Are there measures in place where you can sort of track yourself, and are you guys on target or ahead of target? Like, how does that work as far as leading to that goal?
Yeah. So when we talk about, you know, has it been meaningfully reduced over time? And there's a lot of different measures in the world, you know, and each one has its own arguments for and against, you know, but all of them agree that there's still a lot of people that live in extreme poverty. And even the most optimistic of those academics that might support a certain measure, even they agree that unless we ramp up and scale up our efforts, that we could be in a situation where we start to see progress reversed.
Yep.
The measure we use is the World Bank's indicator, which is $1.90 a day US. And so if we just focus on that figure, when I was born 30 years ago, something like 36% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Like, that's dramatically, that's more than halved. It's gone down. We're now less than 10%. In fact, I think last year, a report was issued that projected something like less than 8% of the world's population live in extreme poverty, right? And so if we look at that, we're looking at, say, 600 million people, thereabouts, between 600, 700 million people. That's phenomenal. Like, this is arguably one of the greatest success stories of the past 30 years is this astonishing decline in the number of people living in extreme poverty. Frankly, unprecedented in the history of humanity. Now, the deadline and the goal is obviously to reduce this to zero by 2030. Are we on track? This is complicated because India and parts of Southeast Asia are currently on track. But if you look at parts of sub-Saharan Africa, there's a lot of work to be done. The best estimates project that if we just continue, you know, doing what we're doing, business as usual, by 2030, some 400 million plus people will still be living in extreme poverty. And in some countries, the number of people living in extreme poverty could actually increase.
Wow.
So a country like Nigeria, currently around 80 million people, that could be well over 100 million people by 2030, unless we do something to turn this around. And between Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo, unless, again, we change, those two countries alone could account for, by the middle of this century, over 40% of all those living in extreme poverty. So there's pockets that are becoming consolidated. I think progress is uneven, and we shouldn't let the global picture mask the fact that there's still a lot of work to be done. And if anything, we need to double down like never before.
This is going to be another hard question to answer, but is there a common trend as far as what are these things that are holding? So I won't just pinpoint on those two countries, but what are holding these countries back? Because I think if you ask somebody, everyday Joe, everyone, when you think about poverty, you just think about food, and that's it. And, you know, growing up in the 80s, you know, you'd see all the famine things and the starving kids, and it was always just this thing that was said all the time. It's like, well, just give them food. But it's not actually fixing the issue. There's obviously bigger problems, and that's part of what you guys are doing. But is there something that you guys have seen as far as a common trend as to what something?
I think you got to look at where we're going in the kind of broader macro trend, right? So what are some of the key shifts going on? Well, there's automation, AI, which is, you know, through its creative destruction, as we were just talking about this, is leading to, you know, jobs disappearing,
Yep.
and perhaps new jobs being created as well. But when you look at the jobs being created in contrast to manufacturing, and if you look at the last 30 years, a big factor in how countries lifted themselves out of extreme poverty would have been through this manufacturing, export-driven growth, right? So, it stands to reason, in countries that can provide cheaper sources of labor, you can manufacture goods, export that, and, you grow your economy that way. This is how China did it. This is Vietnam, this is, other parts of Southeast Asia. That model of industrialization, and it's actually how the West originally did it 150 years ago, that model of industrialization may not be suited to the 21st century, because, you may not have manufacturing jobs. Also, frankly, climate change as well. You look at, we can't afford to go the same path of industrialization we all followed, or the planet's gonna boil, right? So when you look at really the best way, I think, how we can set people up for success, I think we can invest in people's health and education a lot more. We call this human capital in a clinical way, but what we're really talking about is actually the value individuals themselves. Like if someone is healthy, if they have a good education, then regardless of what the future looks like, they can prepare themselves for it. The kind of innovative small business ideas that you spoke about, and other jobs as well. But to do that, we need leaders to invest in the health and education of their citizens. And if you take a country like Nigeria, it's not, because of lack of resources. Nigeria is the wealthiest economy, GDP, not per capita, but GDP wise, in the whole of the African continent, largely through oil revenues, right? And yet a lot of that money, and I know, people can talk about the illicit flows, but even let's just say, assume all of that money, goes into well-meaning sources. A lot of it will go into infrastructure, transport. The African Development Bank, they told me a few weeks ago that 70% of their portfolio goes to infrastructure, transport. It's great, but where is the investment in people? Where is the investment in health and education? Because I think when you invest in people, that's what's really going to change things. That's what's going to set people up to be deciders of their own destiny. And so a big part of our work is actually getting people to call on their leaders in these countries to actually prioritize the health and education of their people. And you mentioned food, again, it's not, hunger is an issue in places where there's conflict, right? And sadly, there's still too much of conflict that takes place in the world today. In Yemen, South Sudan, we were just talking about Venezuela and the instability going on there. But really, in general, hunger isn't really the main issue. I think, a big challenge is nutrition, actually. When we look at, many countries in Africa, 4 out of 10 kids are stunted because they're malnourished, right? So they may be getting enough calories, but are they getting the right calories? And now there's a lot of data that, if we were just talking about investing in people, there's a lot of data that shows that when you're stunted, it's not just physically, it's also like mentally, cognitively as well. And so in terms of your ability to learn, that goes down. It has all of these knock-on effects. So we're currently in the process of partnering with the World Food Programme. And this was actually a big theme of our campaign in South Africa last year around raising the need for leaders to address malnutrition, invest in nutrition, even if it's as simple as school meals. Making sure that kids get at least one meal at school a day that is nutritious, that's going to help them, learn, that's going to lead to addressing
have a little bit of focus during the day, just to take in some information.
Exactly. So malnutrition is a huge issue, that we need to address right now.
Do you think that from a government point of view and individual politicians, and look, some countries are going to be different because people stay in their positions for a long time. Whereas a lot more of the Western countries, we tend to churn through, especially coming from Australia, we tend to churn through people very quickly. And I think when the churn's a lot quicker, people are looking for the short-term feathers in the hat. And what can I do that demonstrates to the public that I've made an impact? So I guess when people make decisions on infrastructure, you can see it. It's this tangible thing that is easy and it's quick, and you can pump money into it, build it, construct it. It's there, everyone can see it, and you can get a round of applause. But when you're investing in people, it's not always an immediate thing. And it's not always easily measured, and it's not always tangible as well. It's something that can be very subjective. So I would assume that a challenge would be trying to pitch it to people that are probably a little bit more ego-driven than they should be, and pitch it in a way that actually inflates their ego and makes them feel like they are having the impact when they are, but showing them and convincing them that here's some ways that you can demonstrate it, and this is how you can make that impact. So I would assume that would be a big challenge, because I see it just even in Australian politics and the decisions that are made very short term, not worried about 10 years time, 15, 20 years time. It's about what can I do within this next several months before I'm potentially kicked out if the next person comes in.
Look, I think there's a lot of sense in what you're saying, and it is a challenge we run up against all the time. So last year in South Africa, we were hearing a lot about unemployment. We was hearing a lot about lack of opportunities. And the government's response, which is not an unfair one, and I think it's important, was to launch internship programs, right? So, okay, how can we make sure people leaving university or people, without these skills can get work experience? And that's great. And, we should go ahead and support internship programs for sure. But what about the kids who are being born now, who are being born into malnutrition, because you know what? The education systems, even in South Africa and many of these countries, people are finishing all the way through high school without the equivalent of even a grade 4, like basic education in reading and writing. They may as well not be at school.
That's right.
So what we've seen, and to your point, it is hard to measure, we've seen like this big concerted effort to get kids into school, and basic enrollment, particularly in primary school, has gone up across the board. But are they actually learning? Right? Because if you don't, right, we're kicking the can down the road. And these kids who are being born now, who will come of age in 15, 20 years when, look how much the world's changed just in the last 2 decades, let alone going forward. If we really want to set them up for future and make sure that they're, being able to participate in innovative, creative industries, we need to invest now. So again, it's the classic problem with climate change, right? Because a lot of our decision makers, are old enough, have the luxury of being old enough that they may not live to see the problems. That said, what excites me, I don't know if you've seen that 16-year-old Swedish young activist. So I was in Davos at a World Food Program, and when she made her speech and she said, "I'm not asking for you to just listen. I'm asking you to panic. I'm telling you to panic." Because of your actions, we've got to clean up the mess. And just the other week, in the UK, thousands, I think there were kids on the news, 11 years old, thousands of these primary school kids took to the streets. So that's what gives me optimism. Like maybe to your point, we can't rely on the leaders to prioritize these issues. And that's why I think we as citizens need to make them a priority, because otherwise, who's going to do that? I mean, in Australia, when you've had how many 5, 6 prime ministers,
embarrassing.
We need another alternative.
That just shows the complexity of everything. It's addressing so many individual issues out there, but each issue has this deep complexity that has a role and effect that impacts lots of people, and the decisions that you make on each of those topics can be dire. Depending on what you decide to do and where you put your focus. And that would be a lot of pressure that gets put on everybody here to sort of make a decision as to where can we invest our resources, this or this, and that can have adverse effects on particular people as well. And obviously who you decide to talk to, how you engage with people that make those decisions and can disperse money and ensure that the money goes to the right people, it's not an easy process.
No, it's not.
So, how long have you been in New York for?
Look, I've been here coming up close to 6 years, I think. Yeah, at least 5.5. Yeah, a long time, it seems like.
Originally from Perth.
Originally from Perth, yeah.
And has this been sort of, I guess, the second main spot that you've lived outside of Perth? Or have you done a little bit of...
Look, I certainly in terms of being based here, we made the decision, although we founded Global Citizen in Australia, we made the decision that New York, because it's close to the UN, it's central, everyone passes through here, it made sense to base our headquarters here, although we have an office in Melbourne and other parts of the world. Look, I've had the great pleasure over the last few years of being, and that's why I'm like, is it 6 or maybe 5.5? Because I've had the great pleasure of being able to spend like 3 months in India, for instance. Wow. I got to spend a Christmas and New Year's a few years ago when we were planning up towards our big event. Last year, I must have spent about the same amount of time, if not longer, in South Africa. And you know, I mean, for me, that was extraordinary. You know, as we were planning this festival, which was to honor Nelson Mandela, being able to spend time with his family, his daughter, being able to visit where he lived in Orlando, Soweto, the church he worshipped in, his circles worshipped in, you know, visiting Robben Island about a week and a half beforehand, you know, and really getting to meet many of the grassroots NGOs doing phenomenal work and understand how this festival can support them. Yeah, getting in the weeds like that, that's what I love. And so I'm fortunate I get to spend a lot of time on the road. It's not as glamorous as people think. I'm heading to Nigeria in a few weeks' time, and I think our schedule is going to be packed, but the upshoot is I get to just meet some incredible people. Did you ever think, going to high school in Perth, that you'd find yourself sitting here doing what you're doing? It's funny. I always remember when we announced this first show I mentioned earlier in Perth with John Legend. I was on one of the local radio stations and, you know, was giving tickets away as part of the initial promotion. And there was a comment on my Facebook wall from a friend I had gone to school with. And she said, "Pretty sure I just heard Michael Sheldrick, the least likely guy to ever be involved in producing music." I mean, I was a nerd at school. The first concert I ever went to, which my mate Leon, I know a mutual friend, teases me about relentlessly, is Bon Jovi. Nice. No offense to all the Bon Jovi fans on there. I thought it was amazing. You know, and that was when I was like 19 or something. Least likely guy to ever be involved. And she said, "Pretty sure I just heard Michael Sheldrick on the radio talking about John Legend and bringing him to Perth for this concert. What's going on?" So no, I didn't. And I didn't think I'd be here in New York now. And I think I often get asked by people asking for career advice. And I say, I did not create this role. 15 years ago, I didn't even know this role existed. And probably, you know what? I'm fortunate that there's probably few roles like this in the world. We just kind of made it up. So I often tell people, I think sometimes people have a lot of pressure to, you know, follow a particular path. Often not because it's because of their parents, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. I think often it's the expectations. I think young people today, we can hold a lot, we can expect a lot of ourselves. And the question I always say is don't get fixated on something too much. Like, be flexible enough to allow, you know, one door to open and walk through it that you may not have thought of. And don't be afraid to take risks, to explore something. You know, I studied law for my sins. And when we were deciding to come to New York, 'cause we didn't have any long-term funding, right? So I was like, geez, am I going to get a job? Am I going to be able to do this? I was like, you know, some little part in the back of my mind was saying the sensible thing is to stay here in Perth, work as a lawyer. And I actually went and met with many of the people who were like maybe 2-3 years out of university working as lawyers. And I got some great advice. They said, you know what? There's always going to be a need for lawyers. There's always going to be a demand here in Perth. So go off, explore this, because you can always come back. And I think that was the best advice. The sun will rise.
Yep.
Don't think too much of these exams now. It's not going to define your future. Doesn't matter if you don't go straight into law. Doesn't matter if you take a year out here. Because who knows, you might regret it later.
I think that's a great way to end it off, and certainly inspiring words, because I've certainly noticed that you get to a point where you get so fixated on the norms and that career path, that stereotypical career path. You study, you might do tertiary education, go and do a field of work. And when you sort of deviate off that, it's something that's not always embraced by a lot of people, friends and family and things like that. And I think the peace of mind knowing that a lot of the things that many people strive for are always going to be there, and you can go off and take some, not be reckless, but you can take risks and try things out and taste the world. And then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then you've always got those things to fall back on as well. Yeah. But you haven't needed to fall back on being a lawyer in Perth yet, so it's not bad.
One can hope.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. By the time this episode comes out, I'll be doing a bit of sticky beaking to see who that special person is that you're going to be having a conversation with in a few weeks' time.
Well,
so
I'm
we'll see.
Happy to provide an update. Wish us good luck.
Yeah, good luck, mate. All right, thank you so much. Thank you. If you want to learn more about Michael and Global Citizen, you can go to the show notes over at andysocial.net. You should be able to click through on the podcast player, and there'll be a bunch of clickable links there. Otherwise, you can go to globalcitizen.org. You can follow Michael on Twitter by searching Mick Sheldrick, MICK_SHELDRICK, or you can follow Global Citizen by searching at GLBLCTZN. Or you can just type that stuff into Google. You guys know how to do it anyway. But go and check it all out. Into the show notes, I'll have some videos and some pictures and some other stuff that is all linked into Michael and Global Citizen. And I'll have other links to make contact with Michael as well if you want to pick his brain about anything. But busy guy, and just doing incredible things, and just really, really happy that he was able to carve out some time for me and invite me to HQ in New York. Very cool. Updates. Okay, a few updates before we wrap up. Lord, we are almost there. We've almost got a deal over the line. It at times feels like it's touch and go with our Japanese friends, but as soon as we got this deal done, the date's locked in, we can then announce that. We can announce the Australian release, which is basically the global release date, and we can start opening up pre-orders. We can announce the first leg of our album launch tour, which is all locked in, and hopefully the dates line up because otherwise we're screwed. But anyway, that's another story. But lots of stuff is pretty much sitting there ready to go, but we're just waiting on basically confirming when the hell this album is able to be released. And once we've got that, then we can go from there. But in the meantime, go over to lord.net.au/united. Please keep shooting this song all over the internet. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple Music, it's on all the streaming services, it's on Bandcamp. You can download the song plus over 20 preview clips from the upcoming album. So if you want a taste of the album, you don't want to wait, you can go and do that. There's also a few of the United t-shirts left as well, so you can go and grab that as well. But yeah, in the meantime, if you can just spread the word. A really good thing I've been doing recently is getting people to leave reviews for all of our back catalogue all over the internet. So places such as iTunes, Amazon, Bandcamp, anywhere that I can think of. Discogs like Metal Archives, places like that. Just leaving as many reviews as possible, covering our back catalogue, just to get our name back into conversation and just to get people excited about the album. And thank you guys so much. People that have been doing it, I've been getting people to shoot me a message, and I've been sending out little thank you packs. So if you're out there, you own a Lord CD, it could be an old one, ancient one, please find a place to leave a review on the internet, and flick me a screenshot of the review, and I will send you out a little thank you pack, because it's helping us big time. And I've mentioned this in a previous episode as well. If you're going to wear a Lord t-shirt, wear it out to a gig before the end of May, shoot me a photo of you at a gig wearing a Lord t-shirt, and I'll also send you out a little care pack as well, because it's all branding, it's all getting the name back into conversation, familiarizing people with the band. And I think we've done a good job of just kind of staying in people's in people's eyesight, but we really need to be part of the conversation and ramp up that noise leading up to the album release. So anything that you guys can do to rep the shirts and rep the branding, spread the music around, talk about the music, it means a lot and can be a massive help for us, especially with the new album coming. So appreciate it. Self-Starter, we are almost ready to launch season 2 of the podcast. It comes out on the first Monday of June. I'm almost finished recording all of the guests for season 2 now. So I'm just about to go into that next phase where I go back and listen to everything, cringe, and start writing notes for TY to be able to edit the episodes and get them all up and running. So a lot of work there, but I do have a couple of guest spots left. So if you do know somebody or yourself that run their own business or have a bit of a side hustle, earn a little bit of extra pocket money, extra coin on the side, basically anybody that fits into that self-starter profile, please hit me up. I would love to get too many guest recommendations, so I've got more to work with than I need. I'm more than happy to but I'm more than happy to consider any recommendations and hopefully get a few of them on the podcast. So please keep them coming. I've had some great ones, and as a result, some of those people are actually on season 2 of Self-Starter. So in the meantime, selfstarter.com.au, you can find season 1 in the podcast player of your choice. And and that's about it. Before we wrap it up, because this podcast is turning into a podcast of shout outs, I can't help myself. I just can't stop shouting people out on this bloody thing. Just a few birthdays. Happy birthday to Turner, my mate Turner, Jeremy Turner, birthday on the 16th of April. Hope you had a good one. By the time it's weird celebrating birthdays in advance, but I'm doing it now in hindsight. Sorry, guys. Sean Ferrugia on episode 171. He is the frontman of In Malice's Wake. His birthday was on the 13th of April. Sam Rylett of Demon Empire was on episode 126. Birthday was on the 12th of April. Happy birthday. Cabba from Claim the Throne and the Blodgecast, April 12th as well. He was on episode 73, so make sure you say happy birthday to Cabba as well. And I think that's it. That's all in my little diary of dates. And I think that's more than enough shout outs for one episode. So thank you so much, folks. Really hope you enjoyed this one. Please share it around. And as I always say, like with these guests, it's an eclectic bag of people from all over the world doing all sorts of different things, tying into lots of different interests. So not every episode's going to be for everybody, but if you do know somebody that's a bit of a campaigner for human rights and to make the world a better place, and somebody that really feeds into this world that Global Citizen is a part of, I would love for you to share this episode in particular with those people and anybody that you think might just find a little bit of interest into this world as well. And I say that with every guest of the Antisocial podcast. So it means a hell of a lot when people are discovering the podcast due to one particular topic or one particular guest. It's just very cool. Okay. All right. That's enough. Okay. Until next week, folks. Take care. Bye-bye. Ta-ta. Ta-ta. Ta-ta.